My husband thought my life was defined by government pay scales and combat boots. He thought the $5,000 a month I made as an Army major was the absolute ceiling of my potential. So as I lay in a hospital bed with fractured ribs and a traumatic brain injury, he did not bring flowers or comfort. He brought divorce papers. He looked down at me, completely unaware that the woman he was so casually discarding actually earned over $700,000 a year as the chief executive officer of a covert defense technology firm. He smiled as he told me he was taking the house, taking the luxury SUV and marrying his mistress, leaving me with a cold warning that I would never recover financially from this. He was right about one thing. Someone was going to face absolute financial ruin. It just was not going to be me. Before I share exactly how I dismantled his perfect new life, piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and hit subscribe if you love seeing arrogant people get exactly what they deserve. The sterile smell of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center is something you never truly forget. It is a sharp clinical blend of bleach iodine and starched linens that burns the back of your throat. I woke up to that smell accompanied by the rhythmic, agonizing beeping of a heart monitor tracking my elevated pulse. My body felt like it had been crushed between two slabs of concrete. 3 days earlier, during a high-stakes tactical transport exercise at Fort Liberty, the heavy armored vehicle I was commanding suffered a catastrophic steering failure. We had rolled twice down a steep embankment. My tactical gear had saved my life, but I still walked away with a severe concussion, 3 fractured ribs, and a left arm wrapped in a heavy brace. Breathing was a chore. Moving was a localized tragedy. I stared at the blank white ceiling of the hospital room, trying to piece together the fragments of my memory, waiting for the familiar face of the man I had pledged my life to. I had been married to Terrence for 6 years. We had met in Atlanta when I was still a junior officer, and he was climbing the corporate ladder in logistics management. Back then, he claimed to admire my drive. He loved walking into military galas with me on his arm, showing off his decorated wife to his civilian friends. But as the years wore on, the reality of being married to a black woman in the military began to chafe at his ego. He resented the early mornings, the sudden deployments, and the fact that my career demanded a level of discipline he simply did not possess. The heavy wooden door of my hospital room clicked open. I turned my head, wincing as a sharp pain shot up my neck. I expected to see a doctor holding a clipboard or my commanding officer coming to check on my unit. Instead, Terrence walked in. I was dressed impeccably in a tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. There was not a single wrinkle on him. His fade was perfectly lined up, and the scent of his expensive cologne immediately overpowered the clinical hospital smell. He looked like a man stepping into a boardroom to close a lucrative deal, not a husband visiting his wife who had just survived a near-fatal accident. He did not rush to my bedside. He did not ask how I was feeling or if the pain medication was working. He did not even offer a superficial display of sympathy. He stood at the foot of my bed, his hands clasped casually in front of him, assessing me with a look of absolute chilling detachment. Then he tossed a thick, heavy manila envelope onto my rolling tray table. It landed with a dull thud that echoed in the quiet room. I looked from the envelope to his face. "Terrence, what is this?" My voice was raspy, throat dry from the intubation tube they had only recently removed. "I filed for divorce," he stated. The words were delivered with a clinical coldness that froze the blood in my veins. "I have already had my lawyers draw up the preliminary asset division agreement. I need you to sign it today so we can push this through the courts as fast as possible." For a moment, the room spun. The concussion amplified the shock, making the walls feel like they were closing in. This was the man who had stood at an altar and promised me forever. This was the man who had held my hand through the grueling months of officer candidate school. And here he was, standing over my battered body, treating our marriage like a terminated business contract. "You filed for divorce," I repeated, trying to process the sheer audacity of the timing. "I am lying in a hospital bed, Terrence. I almost died 3 days ago." He began to pace the length of the small room, his leather dress shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. "Do not do that, Jada. Do not play the victim. You have been married to the United States Army for the last 6 years. I have just been a convenient accessory for your career." He stopped pacing and leaned against the windowsill, crossing his arms. He looked at me not with anger, but with a deep, unsettling condescension. "I am 36 years old, Jada. I am in the prime of my life and I am exhausted. I am tired of playing second fiddle to your deployments. I am tired of the combat boots by the front door. I am tired of coming home to a woman who operates like a drill sergeant instead of a wife." Every word was calculated to tear me down. He was attacking the very core of who I was. "I want a woman who is present," he continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I want a woman who embraces her femininity, someone who knows how to be a partner, not a commander, someone who actually brings a soft, welcoming energy to my life instead of treating every day like a tactical mission." He paused, letting the silence stretch out, ensuring his next words would cause maximum damage. "Her name is Chloe." My heart pounded against my fractured ribs, the monitor beside my bed betraying my spiked heart rate. "She is 26, Terrence said, a smug, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "She is a luxury realtor in Buckhead. She is soft, she is gorgeous, and she actually prioritizes my needs. We have been seeing each other for 8 months. 8 months. For 8 months, while I was running training drills in the freezing rain, managing logistics for hundreds of soldiers, and building our future. He had been parading around Atlanta with a 26-year-old realtor. The late nights at the office, the sudden weekend business trips, the unexplained charges on his personal credit cards that he furiously defended as corporate expenses. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. "You are a coward," I whispered, gripping the edge of the bedsheet with my good hand. "You waited until I was physically incapacitated to do this." "I waited until I had everything lined up perfectly," he corrected, stepping closer to the bed. "Which brings us to the paperwork." He tapped the manila envelope with his index finger. "I am keeping the house in Atlanta," he declared. "I am also keeping the luxury SUV. Chloe and I are building a life together, and we need the space. You will sign over your equity in the property, and in exchange I will not come after your little military pension or whatever meager savings you have tucked away." I stared at him, my mind racing through the sheer audacity of his demands. The house in Atlanta was a sprawling 5-bedroom property in a highly coveted neighborhood. When we bought it 4 years ago, Terrence had terrible credit due to a string of failed logistics investments. I had paid the entire 20% down payment out of my own pocket. We had put his name on the deed to boost his ego, but the financial heavy lifting had always been mine. The luxury SUV he loved parading around town in was not even in his name, but he did not know that yet. "You want me to sign away my home and my vehicle while I am lying in a hospital bed?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. My military training was kicking in. When faced with an ambush, you do not panic. You assess the hostiles, you evaluate the terrain, and you look for the tactical advantage. Terrence laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Let us be real, Jada. What are you going to do? Fight me in court? You are just an army major making $5,000 a month. If you try to drag this out, I will hire the most aggressive divorce attorneys in Georgia. They will tie you up in litigation for years. They will drain every single dime of that measly military salary. You will drown in legal fees before we even reach a settlement." He leaned down, bringing his face inches from mine, his eyes dark with malice. "Sign the papers, Jada. Take the clean break. Because if you fight me, I promise you." He thought he had me backed into a corner. He thought his corporate salary and his new luxury realtor girlfriend made him untouchable. He viewed my life entirely through the lens of a government pay scale, assuming that the uniform I wore was the absolute limit of my financial capability. What Terrence did not know, what nobody in my personal life knew, was that the military encourages officers to possess specialized skills. 5 years ago, utilizing my top secret security clearance and my extensive background in cyber warfare, I had quietly founded a civilian defense technology firm called Aegis Cyber Defense. Through an intricate, entirely legal network of blind trusts and holding companies designed to protect my identity as active duty military, I owned 100% of the firm. We contracted directly with the Department of Defense, providing elite proprietary firewall architecture for domestic military bases. I was not just an army major making $5,000 a month. I was the chief executive officer of a thriving defense contractor. My annual net compensation after corporate taxes and employee payroll exceeded $700,000 a year. My actual net worth was currently sitting at roughly $4.5 million. And Terrence, in his arrogant rush to discard me for a younger woman, had just handed me a preliminary asset division agreement that explicitly waived his right to a full financial discovery process. In the state of Georgia, if a couple mutually agrees to an uncontested division of known assets to expedite a divorce, they waive the right to dig into hidden or undisclosed financials. By demanding I sign away the house and the car today, he thought he was stealing my biggest assets. In reality, he was legally locking himself out of my empire. He was voluntarily signing away his right to half of millions of dollars, all to keep a house with a mortgage he could not actually afford. The pain in my ribs was agonizing, but the absolute clarity of the moment numbed it entirely. I did not cry. I did not scream. Tears are for unexpected losses, and Terrence was no longer a loss. He was a tactical error actively destroying himself. I slowly reached across my body with my uninjured right arm. I picked up the heavy silver pen he had laid beside the envelope. "You want the house?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked onto his. "I am taking the house," he corrected smugly. I pulled the documents from the envelope. I did not bother reading the fine print of his lawyer's aggressive posturing. I flipped straight to the signature pages. The scratch of the ink against the heavy paper sounded incredibly loud in the quiet hospital room. I signed away my claim to the Atlanta property. I signed the waiver granting him full possession of the luxury SUV. I signed the addendum stating that this agreement bypassed a formal financial discovery period, ensuring a swift and uncontested dissolution of our marriage. I neatly stacked the papers, capped the pen, and handed the entire bundle back to him. "Take them," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Enjoy the house, Terrence." Terrence snatched the papers from my hand. He looked at my signatures, a triumphant, almost predatory smile breaking across his face. He actually thought he had broken me. He thought my swift compliance was born of exhaustion and defeat. "Smart girl," he mocked, sliding the documents back into the envelope. "Focus on your recovery, Major. You are going to need all your strength to figure out where you are going to live next." He turned on his heel and walked toward the door. He did not look back. He did not say goodbye. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him, sealing the end of our 6-year marriage. I sat alone in the sterile room, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. The silence should have felt heavy, but instead it felt incredibly light. The trap had been set, and Terrence had willingly stepped right into it. Less than 30 seconds after his footsteps faded down the hospital corridor, a sharp, distinct ringing pierced the quiet room. It was not my personal cell phone. It was the heavily encrypted, restricted government phone sitting on my nightstand. The device was solely dedicated to Aegis Cyber Defense Communications. I carefully reached over and answered it. "Major Williams," the voice on the other end said. "It was my primary liaison at the Pentagon. I apologize for calling while you are in recovery, but we needed immediate executive authorization. The Oversight Committee has just concluded their review." "Go ahead, Director," I replied, my voice steady, the pain in my chest entirely forgotten. "The Department of Defense has officially approved the contract renewal for Aegis Cyber Defense. The new firewall architecture rollout is greenlit for the Eastern Seaboard bases. We are authorizing the transfer of $4.2 million to your corporate holding account effective immediately. Congratulations, CEO." "Thank you, Director. Process the authorization. I will review the deployment schedule once I am discharged." I hung up the phone and placed it back on the nightstand. I looked at the empty space where my husband had stood just moments ago, boasting about my impending financial ruin. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the sharp ache in my ribs. Terrence wanted a clean break. He wanted to take the assets he could see and run toward his new shiny life. He had absolutely no idea the level of devastation that was about to rain down upon him. 72 hours after Terrence walked out of my hospital room, the military doctors finally cleared me for discharge. My body was a roadmap of deep purple bruising, and my fractured ribs protested with every shallow breath I took. A junior transport officer drove me from Walter Reed to a temporary military housing unit I had secured on base. It was a sterile utilitarian space, with cinder-block walls, standard-issue heavy wooden furniture, and a mattress that felt like compressed cardboard. It was a massive departure from the sprawling custom-designed Atlanta estate I had called home just a few days prior. But as I set my canvas duffel bag onto the rigid floor, I did not feel a single ounce of loss. I felt like a general stepping into a command tent. My personal cell phone, which I had kept powered down for the duration of my hospital stay to avoid the inevitable flood of insincere inquiries, vibrated the second I turned it on. A barrage of notifications instantly overwhelmed the lock screen. They were not messages checking on my recovery. They were social media alerts, frantic text messages from mutual acquaintances, and links to Instagram posts. I sat heavily on the edge of the stiff mattress, wincing as a sharp pain shot up my side, and opened the first link. Terrence had not just filed for divorce. He had utilized a highly questionable legal loophole claiming a fraudulent date of physical separation to bypass the standard waiting periods and rush to courthouse dissolution. He had moved with a speed that bordered on absolute desperation, and the photos staring back at me from my phone screen explained exactly why. Terrence and his 26-year-old luxury realtor, Chloe, had flown straight to Las Vegas. The images documented a lavish, excessively flashy wedding ceremony at a high-end resort on the Strip. There was Terrence wearing a custom-tailored ivory tuxedo, holding a glass of vintage champagne. There was Chloe draped in a designer gown that cost more than my first car, flashing a massive diamond engagement ring at the camera. They were surrounded by a small group of Terrence's equally arrogant friends, celebrating his brand new life, while his wife of 6 years was literally bleeding in a military trauma ward. The audacity was breathtaking. He had planned this entire spectacle for months, using my deployment schedule and my training exercises as the perfect cover to build a completely separate reality. Before I could even process the sheer volume of financial liability he must have incurred to fund that Vegas spectacle, a sharp, aggressive knock hammered against the front door of my temporary housing unit. I carefully pushed myself to my feet, stabilizing my core against the pain in my ribs, and walked toward the entrance. I did not have a peephole, but I did not need one. The entitled, heavy-handed rhythm of the knock told me exactly who was standing on the other side. I pulled the heavy door open. My sister-in-law, Sarah, stood on the small concrete porch. Sarah was a white woman who had married Terrence's older brother David about 5 years ago. From the moment she entered our predominantly black family, she had carried an unearned sense of authority and an exhausting savior complex. She loved to insert herself into family business, often speaking over David and treating the rest of us with a thinly veiled condescension that she masked as helpful advice. Today, she had not come to offer help. She had come armed with hostility. Sarah pushed her way past me without waiting for an invitation, her designer handbag swinging aggressively against her hip. She looked around the small, stark military housing unit and let out a short, dismissive scoff. "Well, I guess this is what you are used to anyway," she said, turning to face me. She did not ask how my injuries were healing. She did not offer a single word of sympathy for the fact that I had nearly died 4 days ago. Instead, she crossed her arms, adopting a stance of absolute superiority. "I am not here for a social visit, Jada," Sarah announced, her voice dripping with venom. "I am here to collect what you owe our family. Terrence is finally moving on with his life, and David and I are not going to subsidize your medical drama." I remained perfectly still, my military training keeping my breathing even and my expression entirely unreadable. "What exactly do you think I owe you, Sarah?" She reached into her expensive leather tote and pulled out a heavily highlighted printout of a bank statement. Terrence had to borrow $15,000 from David's business account to cover the out-of-network deductibles for your little hospital stay. He told us that your military insurance refused to cover the private trauma specialists. Terrence always carried the financial weight in your marriage, but he is done doing it. It is time you pay your own way. The sheer magnitude of Terrence's lies unfolded before me with crystal clarity. My military healthcare covered every single dime of my hospitalization. There were no out-of-network deductibles. Terrence had not borrowed that money to save my life. He had stolen $15,000 from his own brother's joint business account to fund his extravagant Vegas wedding and buy Chloe's massive diamond ring. And he had used my near-fatal accident as the ultimate, unquestionable excuse to get his hands on the cash. Terrence told you that money was for my medical bills, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. Do not play dumb, Jada, Sarah snapped, stepping closer, her eyes flashing with unwarranted self-righteousness. He told us everything. He told us how you drained his savings because you refused to transition to the civilian sector and get a real job. He told us how exhausting it is to be married to a woman who refuses to be soft. Terrence is moving on to a woman who actually brings value to the table. Chloe knows how to treat a successful man. You just know how to give orders. She thrust a pen toward me. Write the check, Jada. David is too nice to demand it from you while you are injured, but I am not. Pay us back the $15,000, and you can get back to living on your little government pension in peace. I looked at Sarah, studying the smug satisfaction radiating from her face. She truly believed she was putting a broke, discarded woman in her place. She thought a $15,000 demand was going to break me, that I would cry or beg for a payment plan or humiliate myself trying to explain my financial constraints. I did not say a word. I turned my back on her and walked over to my canvas duffel bag. I unzipped the side compartment and pulled out a sleek black leather checkbook. It was connected to a secondary, entirely separate civilian account I used for miscellaneous personal expenses. I walked over to the small laminate kitchen table, clicked the pen she had handed me, and wrote out a check for exactly $15,000 made payable to David and Sarah. As I signed my name, my encrypted tactical tablet sitting on the table right next to the checkbook lit up. A secure notification popped onto the screen. It was an automated prompt from my chief financial officer at Aegis Cyber Defense requiring immediate biometric authorization for our bi-weekly corporate payroll. I picked up the check and turned to face Sarah. In one fluid motion, I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner on the tablet screen. The device chimed softly, officially authorizing a $100,000 payroll distribution for my elite team of civilian engineers. I held the $15,000 check out to Sarah. She snatched it from my fingers, a triumphant smirk playing across her lips. She glanced at the signature, ensuring it was valid, and shoved it carelessly into her designer bag. Good, Sarah said, her voice dripping with condescension. At least you have some dignity left. Good luck out here, Jada. You are going to need it. She turned and marched out of the housing unit, the heavy door slamming shut behind her. The silence that followed was not lonely. It was tactical. It was the deep, focused quiet of a battlefield right before an artillery strike. I walked over to my tablet, locked the door, and initiated a heavily encrypted video call. The screen connected directly to the private office of Marcus Sterling, the senior wealth management attorney, who handled the intricate blind trust architecture of my entire corporate empire. Sterling appeared on the screen looking sharp and alert. Major Williams, I received the alert that you were discharged. Are you secure? I am secure, Sterling. We are moving to the execution phase. Terrence finalized a fraudulent courthouse divorce and married the girl in Las Vegas yesterday. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He rushed the paperwork. That means he formally accepted the preliminary asset division agreement you signed in the hospital. He voluntarily waived his right to a full financial discovery. Exactly, I replied. He wanted a clean break so badly he blinded himself. Let us talk about the assets he fought so hard to keep. Tell me about the Atlanta house. Sterling pulled up a file on his end. The Atlanta property is a prime piece of real estate, but the financial structure is a ticking time bomb. Because Terrence had terrible credit when you purchased the home, you secured the property using an aggressive adjustable rate mortgage under a holding company, intending to refinance it later. 3 months ago, when you instructed me to quietly separate your liability from his personal accounts, I removed your primary guarantee from that specific mortgage note. And the rate reset, I asked? The introductory fixed rate period expired exactly 24 hours ago. Sterling confirmed, a slight predatory smile touching his lips. The mortgage transitioned to the adjustable market rate. Because Terrence's individual credit score is abysmal and his debt-to-income ratio is currently catastrophic, the premium penalty kicked in. The monthly payment on that house just jumped from $4,000 a month to $8,500 a month. And since he signed the asset division agreement, taking sole possession of the property. The bank will now look exclusively to him for that payment. He cannot afford $8,000 a month on his logistics salary, I stated plainly, especially not while funding a new luxury lifestyle. The bank will issue a pre-foreclosure warning the moment his first updated payment bounces, Sterling noted. Now regarding the luxury SUV he requested in the settlement. The vehicle is a corporate lease, I said, pulling up my own administrative dashboard on the tablet. It is registered under Aegis Cyber Defense for executive transport. Terrence is not an employee of my firm. By keeping the vehicle after the dissolution of our marriage, he is technically in possession of unauthorized corporate property. Do I have your authorization to initiate the corporate vehicle recovery protocol? Sterling asked, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. You have a green light, Sterling. Track the GPS. I want that vehicle recovered immediately, no matter where it is parked. Consider it done, CEO, Sterling replied. Is there anything else? Monitor the routing numbers on a $15,000 personal check I just wrote to his brother David. Terrence stole that money from David's business account to buy his new wife's engagement ring, and he blamed it on my medical bills. When Sarah tries to deposit my check, I want your forensic accounting team to flag the transaction discrepancy with their banking institution. We will trigger an automatic fraud review on David's accounts the second the deposit clears, Sterling promised. Terrence's embezzlement is about to become a matter of public record for his family. I ended the call with Sterling. I sat back in the rigid wooden chair, the dull ache in my fractured ribs serving as a grounding reminder of the physical reality I had survived. My mind was sharp, evaluating the board, anticipating the enemy's next maneuver. Just as I reached for a glass of water, my proprietary cyber defense software flashed a brilliant pulsing red across my tablet screen. A critical security alert overrode my display. Someone was attempting a forced entry into my private financial network. I tapped the screen, tracing the origin of the intrusion. It was a rapid, frantic series of login attempts, hitting an old dummy joint bank account. It was an account I had intentionally left active with exactly $400 in it, but it was visually linked to my primary military direct deposit portal. The IP address pinged clearly on my global tracking map. It was originating from a luxury hotel suite on the Las Vegas Strip. Terrence. I was trying to log into my accounts. He was trying to bypass the security protocols to drain what he incorrectly assumed was my life savings. The lavish wedding, the expensive champagne, the designer gown, he had overextended himself entirely, and now he was desperate for cash. I was actively trying to commit wire fraud against a decorated military officer to fund his honeymoon. I watched the red alerts stack up on my screen line after line of failed login attempts. I did not block his IP address. I did not shut the server down. I simply engaged the federal tracking protocol, silently documenting every single keystroke he made, packaging the digital evidence into an encrypted file designated for federal authorities. I thought he had left me broken in a hospital bed with nothing. He thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn that in the world of cyber warfare and financial devastation, I did not just wear the uniform. I owned the entire battlefield. I stared at Sarah, letting her words hang in the stagnant air of the temporary housing unit, $15,000 for out-of-network medical deductibles. The sheer magnitude of Terrence's lies unfolded before me with absolute crystal clarity. As an active-duty military officer, my healthcare covered every single dime of my trauma care. There were no out-of-network specialists. There were no hidden fees. Terrence had not borrowed that money to save my life. He had stolen $15,000 from his own brother's joint business account to fund his extravagant Vegas wedding and buy Chloe a massive diamond ring. And he had used my near-fatal accident as the ultimate unquestionable excuse to get his hands on the cash. Sarah paced the small room, her heels clicking aggressively against the cheap linoleum floor. She looked around at the cinder-block walls and standard-issue furniture with open disgust, her posture radiating an unearned sense of superiority. She did not know she was standing in the presence of a woman whose net worth dwarfed her entire family estate. She only saw a discarded, battered soldier. Terrence told you that money was for my medical bills, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. My military training suppressed the urge to react to the sharp pain radiating from my fractured ribs. Do not play dumb, Jada, Sarah snapped. She stopped pacing and glared at me, her eyes flashing with a highly weaponized self-righteous anger. He told us everything. He told us how you drained his savings because you refused to transition to the civilian sector and get a real job. He told us how exhausting it is to be married to a woman who refuses to be soft. Terrence is moving on to a woman who actually brings value to the table. Chloe knows how to treat a successful man. You just know how to give orders. The racial and gendered microaggressions were layered so thickly into her words, I could practically choke on them. Sarah had always loved playing the delicate, affluent suburban wife, and she clearly delighted in painting me as the rigid, masculine, aggressive black woman who had finally driven her husband away. She truly believed that because I wore combat boots and commanded troops, I lacked value as a partner. She thought my dedication to my country was a financial liability. She thrust a manicured hand toward me, impatiently waiting for me to break down. Write the check, Jada. David is too nice to demand it from you while you are injured, but I am not. Pay us back the $15,000 and you can get back to living on your little government pension in peace. I looked at Sarah, studying the smug satisfaction radiating from her face. She truly believed she was putting a broke, discarded woman in her place. She thought a $15,000 demand was going to break me, that I would cry or beg for a payment plan, or humiliate myself trying to explain my financial constraints to a woman who hated me. I did not say a single word in my defense. I did not justify my career or defend my femininity. I simply turned my back on her and walked over to my heavy canvas duffel bag resting on the floor. Every movement required a calculated breath to manage the searing pain in my chest, but I kept my posture impeccably straight. I unzipped the side compartment and pulled out a sleek black leather checkbook. It was connected to a secondary, entirely separate civilian account. I used exclusively for miscellaneous personal expenses, completely detached from my corporate holdings. I walked over to the small laminate kitchen table. I picked up a pen, clicked it open, and began to write. I wrote out a check for exactly $15,000, making it payable directly to David and Sarah. As I was forming my signature, the screen of my encrypted tactical tablet sitting on the table right next to the checkbook suddenly lit up. A secure notification popped onto the high-resolution display. It was an automated high-priority prompt from the Chief Financial Officer of Aegis Cyber Defense. The message required my immediate biometric authorization to release the bi-weekly corporate payroll for my company. I picked up the completed check in my left hand. With my right hand, I turned to face Sarah, keeping the tablet screen perfectly angled so she could not see the financial interface. In one fluid, practiced motion, I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner on the glass screen. The device chimed softly, a quiet electronic confirmation that officially authorized a $100,000 payroll distribution for my elite team of civilian software engineers and cybersecurity analysts. In the exact same moment that I effortlessly moved $100,000 of my own wealth across the country, I held the $15,000 check out to Sarah. She snatched the small piece of paper from my fingers with aggressive force. A triumphant, vicious smirk played across her lips as she examined it. She scrutinized the signature, ensuring it was valid, completely failing to realize that the name written on that check belonged to a chief executive officer who could buy and sell her entire life without checking a bank balance. She shoved the check carelessly into her designer tote bag and adjusted her jacket. "Good, Sarah," said her voice dripping with absolute condescension. "At least you have some dignity left, though I have no idea how you are going to survive now that Terrence is not subsidizing your life. Good luck out here, Jada. You are going to need it." She turned on her heel and marched out of the housing unit. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, rattling the cheap window frames. The silence that followed her departure was not lonely. It was intensely tactical. It was the deep, focused quiet of a battlefield right before an artillery strike is called in. I stood alone in the center of the sterile room, listening to the echo of the slamming door fade away. Terrence had stolen from his own brother, blamed it on my trauma care, and sent his arrogant wife to extort a woman recovering from a brain injury. They all thought they had won. They thought they had secured their wealth and left me with nothing. They had no idea they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle their entire fraudulent empire. I looked down at the tablet still glowing on the table. The payroll confirmation receipt displayed a string of zeros that represented the thriving, highly classified business I had built from the ground up. I had spent years navigating the intense pressure of military service while simultaneously negotiating multi-million-dollar defense contracts in the civilian sector. I knew how to handle high-stakes pressure. I knew how to identify a security breach and neutralize a threat. Terrence was no longer my husband. He was a hostile vulnerability that needed to be liquidated. Sarah walking into my home and demanding that money was the fatal error in their plan. By forcing me to write that check, they had inadvertently created a documented financial link between my forensic accountants and David's business accounts. The routing numbers were now in play. The moment she deposited that $15,000, my financial team would be able to track exactly where Terrence's stolen funds had originated and where they had gone. Chloe's massive diamond ring was sitting on a foundation of wire fraud and embezzlement, and Sarah had just handed me the map to prove it. I sat down carefully in the rigid wooden chair, ignoring the throbbing in my ribs. I reached for my tablet and opened the secure communication channel. It was time to initiate the financial ambush. I established the encrypted connection to the private office of Marcus Sterling. He was the senior wealth management attorney who handled the intricate blind trust architecture of my entire corporate empire. Sterling appeared on the high-resolution screen looking sharp and entirely alert, despite the sudden notice. I confirmed my location was secure and informed him that we were officially moving to the execution phase. I explained that Terrence had finalized a fraudulent courthouse divorce to bypass the standard waiting periods and married his mistress in Las Vegas just yesterday. Sterling immediately understood the legal implications of Terrence rushing the paperwork. By doing so, Terrence had formally accepted the preliminary asset division agreement I signed in the hospital. He had voluntarily waived his right to a full financial discovery. Terrence wanted a clean break so desperately that he had legally blinded himself to the reality of my assets. He traded access to millions for the superficial victory of controlling the immediate narrative. I directed Sterling to pull the files on the assets Terrence had fought so fiercely to keep, starting with the Atlanta house. Sterling brought up the property records on his end and laid out the financial reality of the trap I had set. The Atlanta property was a beautiful, sprawling piece of real estate, but its financial structure was a ticking time bomb. When we purchased the home 4 years ago, Terrence had terrible credit due to a string of failed logistics investments. We had secured the property using an aggressive adjustable rate mortgage under a holding company. My original intention was to refinance the property later once his credit improved. However, 3 months ago, when my security protocols first detected anomalies in his travel schedule and credit card usage, I quietly separated my liability from his personal accounts. I instructed Sterling to remove my primary guarantee from that specific mortgage note, legally isolating my wealth from the impending fallout. Sterling confirmed that the introductory fixed-rate period on that mortgage had expired exactly 24 hours ago. The mortgage had now transitioned to the volatile adjustable market rate. Because Terrence possessed an abysmal individual credit score and a debt-to-income ratio that was currently catastrophic, the maximum premium penalty had automatically kicked in. The monthly payment on that house had just jumped from $4,000 a month to $8,500 a month. Since Terrence had eagerly signed the asset division agreement taking sole possession of the property, the bank would now look exclusively to his logistics manager's salary to satisfy that massive debt. I noted plainly that Terrence could not afford an $8,500 monthly payment on his civilian salary, especially not while funding a new luxury lifestyle with a 26-year-old realtor. Sterling assured me that the bank would issue a pre-foreclosure warning, the absolute moment his first updated payment bounced, which was scheduled to happen by the end of the business day. Next, we moved to the luxury sport utility vehicle he had demanded in the settlement. I opened my own administrative dashboard on the tactical tablet and accessed the vehicle registration files. The vehicle was not a personal asset. It was a high-end corporate lease registered directly under Aegis Cyber Defense for executive transport. Terrence was not an employee of my firm. By taking possession of the vehicle after the dissolution of our marriage, he was technically operating unauthorized corporate property. Sterling asked for my direct authorization to initiate the corporate vehicle recovery protocol. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, ready to deploy the asset retrieval team. I gave him the green light without a single ounce of hesitation. I instructed him to track the onboard global positioning system and recover that vehicle immediately, no matter where it was parked. I wanted it towed straight out of whatever luxury valet lot Terrence was currently using to impress his new bride in Nevada. I wanted him to walk out of his five-star hotel and find empty pavement. Finally, I reminded Sterling to monitor the routing numbers on the $15,000 personal check I had just written to his brother David. Terrence had stolen that money directly from David's business account to buy Chloe her massive diamond engagement ring, and he had cowardly blamed the missing funds on my trauma care deductibles. The moment Sarah tried to deposit my check, I wanted the forensic accounting team to flag the transaction discrepancy with their banking institution. Sterling promised to trigger an automatic fraud review on David's accounts the second the deposit cleared. Terrence's embezzlement was about to become a matter of public record for his entire family. I ended the call with Sterling and set the tablet down on the laminate kitchen table. I sat back in the rigid wooden chair. The dull ache in my fractured ribs served as a grounding physical reminder of the violent reality I had survived, but my mind was completely sharp. I was evaluating the board, anticipating the enemy maneuvers, and securing my perimeter from within the cinder block walls of a temporary military housing unit. Just as I reached across the table for a glass of water, my proprietary cyber defense software flashed a brilliant pulsing red across my tablet screen. A critical security alert overrode my standard display, throwing the small room into a harsh crimson glow. Someone was attempting a forced entry into my private financial network. I tapped the screen, instantly tracing the origin of the intrusion. It was a rapid, frantic series of login attempts, hitting an old dummy joint bank account. It was a legacy account I had intentionally left active with exactly $400 in it, but the routing interface was visually linked to my primary military direct deposit portal. The Internet Protocol address pinged clearly on my global tracking map. The location coordinates resolved to a luxury hotel suite right on the Las Vegas Strip. It was Terrence. I was actively trying to hack into my accounts. He was trying to bypass the basic security protocols to drain what he incorrectly assumed was my life savings. The lavish wedding, the expensive champagne, the designer gown, the upgraded hotel suite. He had overextended his credit entirely, and now the financial reality of his impulsive decisions was crashing down on him. He was desperate for cash. I was so desperate that he was actively trying to commit wire fraud against a decorated military officer to fund his honeymoon. I sat perfectly still, watching the red alerts stack up on my screen in real time. Line after line of failed login attempts populated the digital ledger. I did not block his Internet Protocol address. I did not shut the server down to lock him out. When an enemy combatant wanders into a minefield, you do not warn them to turn back. You let them keep walking. I simply engaged the federal tracking protocol on my software. The system began silently documenting every single keystroke he made. It logged the timestamps, the location data, and the specific routing numbers he was trying to compromise. I was packaging the digital evidence into an encrypted, immutable file designated for federal authorities. Crossing state lines digitally to access unauthorized funds tied to a military direct deposit was a severe federal offense. I thought he had left me broken and discarded in a hospital bed with nothing. He thought his corporate salary and his manipulation tactics made him completely untouchable. He assumed my entire existence was limited to combat boots and a government pension. He was about to learn that in the world of cyber warfare and absolute financial devastation, I did not just wear the uniform. I owned the entire battlefield. And he had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to ensure he would spend the next decade in federal prison. I saved the intrusion logs to a secure partition drive and closed the interface. The red glow vanished from the room, replaced by the cool, objective light of the afternoon sun, filtering through the small window. The trap was set, the evidence was secured, and the timer was ticking down. Tomorrow would be day 4. Tomorrow the bank notices would arrive, the car would disappear, and the illusion of his perfect new life would violently shatter. All I had to do was wait for his phone call. Morning arrives with the sharp precision of a military bugle. I am awake long before the sun rises over the base. The physical trauma from the transport accident still lingers in my bones, but the sharpest edge of the pain has dulled into a manageable, persistent ache. I move through the small cinderblock housing unit with deliberate care, brewing a pot of strong black coffee and opening my tactical tablet to review the overnight security logs. The digital perimeter I established around my assets remains entirely secure. The trap has been perfectly primed. All that is required now is for the target to realize he has stepped on the landmine. That realization arrives exactly at 7:14 in the morning. My personal cell phone begins to vibrate against the cheap laminate kitchen table. It is not a gentle, polite notification. It is a persistent, aggressive ringing that demands immediate attention. I look down at the screen. The caller identification displays Terrence. Just 4 days ago, this man stood over my hospital bed in a tailored suit, practically glowing with arrogance as he bragged about his beautiful young mistress and my impending financial ruin. He had demanded my signature, taken what he believed was everything of value, and walked out without a single backward glance. I take a slow sip of my coffee, letting the hot liquid steady my nerves. I do not rush. I let the phone ring 4 times before I finally swipe the screen and accept the call. I do not even get the chance to say hello. Jada, what did you do? Terrence is not speaking. He is screeching. The sound of his voice is high, frantic, and entirely stripped of its usual polished corporate bravado. I can hear him hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. The background noise on his end paints a chaotic picture. I hear the muffled, frantic sounds of a luxury hotel suite in complete disarray. I remain perfectly still, my voice dropping to a calm, authoritative register. I ask him to lower his voice and state his purpose. You know exactly what you did, Terrence yells, his voice cracking with absolute terror. The bank just called me. They woke me up at 6 in the morning on my honeymoon. They tried to draft the mortgage payment for the Atlanta house out of my personal checking account. Jada, the draft was for $8,500. It completely overdrew my account. Every single card I have is declining. I listen to the sheer panic radiating through the speaker. He is unraveling in real time. The loan officer told me the introductory rate expired. Terrence continues talking so fast he is tripping over his own words. He said the interest rate adjusted to the current market premium because my credit score triggered a high-risk penalty. They issued a pre-foreclosure warning immediately because the payment bounced so hard it flagged my entire financial profile. Jada, you told me the mortgage was $4,000 a month. You lied to me. You never asked to see the amortization schedule, Terrence. I reply with absolute freezing detachment. You simply brought a preliminary asset division agreement into a trauma ward and demanded I sign over the deed. You wanted sole possession of the property. You eagerly assumed all legal and financial liabilities associated with that address. The fact that you cannot afford the house you stole is a consequence of your own staggering incompetence. He lets out a sound that is half sob and half scream. But that is not even the worst part, he cries out. I do not care about the house right now. Where is the car, Jada? What did you do with the car? I take another sip of my coffee, savoring the absolute success of the operation. Tell me what happened, Terrence. We were going down to breakfast. He stammers, his breathing growing even more erratic. We were walking through the lobby of the resort. Chloe was wearing her new dress. Everyone was looking at us. We walked right up to the valet stand. I handed the attendant my ticket. I tipped him $20. And the valet looked at me and said the vehicle was no longer on the premises. Terrence pauses, and I can literally hear the humiliation choking him. Hy told me a corporate recovery team showed up with a flatbed tow truck at 4 in the morning. Terrence whispers, the reality of his public embarrassment finally breaking him. He said they presented legal documentation proving the luxury sport utility vehicle was a registered corporate fleet asset that had been reported as unauthorized possession. The valet manager let them tow it right out of the VIP parking garage. Chloe was standing right next to me. Dozens of people were watching. The hotel manager asked if I was involved in a corporate theft investigation. Jada, you reported the car stolen while I am on my honeymoon. I did not report it stolen, I correct him smoothly. I reported it as unauthorized corporate property. You assume that because my name was on the insurance policy, the vehicle was a personal marital asset. You fail to realize that the vehicle is leased and registered under my company. You are a civilian who is entirely unaffiliated with my enterprise. When you signed the paperwork demanding that vehicle, you legally documented your intent to retain property that belongs to a federal defense contractor. I can hear the devastating impact of my words crashing down on him. For his entire life, Terrence had operated on the assumption that looking successful was the exact same thing as being successful. He had paraded around Atlanta in a luxury vehicle. He did not own living in a massive estate. He could not afford playing the role of a wealthy logistics manager while secretly relying on the very woman he openly disdained to fund his entire existence. In the background of the phone call, the sharp, shrill voice of his new bride suddenly cuts through the audio. Chloe is screaming at him. I hear her demanding to know why the hotel concierge just called the suite to inform them that the credit card on file for their incidentals has been declined. I hear her asking where the car is. I hear her asking why he is crying on the phone with his ex-wife instead of fixing the problem. Terrence covers the receiver, his muffled voice begging Chloe to just give him 5 minutes to sort out a bank error. He comes back to the phone, his tone shifting from outrage to sheer pathetic desperation. Jada, please, he begs, the arrogance completely erased from his vocabulary. Chloe is threatening to leave. The hotel is threatening to lock us out of the suite because the card bounced. I am stranded in Nevada without a vehicle. You have to fix this. You have to call the bank and authorize a transfer. You have your military retirement savings. You have your pension fund. Wire me $20,000 right now to clear the overdrawn account and get the hotel off my back. The audacity of the demand is almost staggering. He had left me in a hospital bed with fractured ribs to marry a 26-year-old woman, and now he was demanding I liquidate my military retirement to pay for his honeymoon suite. You are demanding I fund the honeymoon you took with your mistress, I state, ensuring the reality of his request is verbalized clearly. I am demanding you pay me what you owe me for wasting my youth. Terrence snarls, his desperation morphing back into a hostile, cornered aggression. You owe me for putting up with your masculine, aggressive behavior for 6 years. If you do not wire that money to my account in the next 10 minutes, I am going to call your commanding officer at Fort Liberty. I will report you for financial abuse. I will tell the military brass that you are utilizing predatory legal tactics to bankrupt a civilian. I will end your career, Jada. Hai is grasping at straws, utilizing threats that hold absolutely no weight against a woman who commands an empire he cannot even comprehend. He thinks he is negotiating from a position of power. He is merely standing on the gallows complaining about the rope. I listen to his threat hanging in the digital silence between us. A threat to call my commanding officer at Fort Liberty and report me for financial abuse. It is a desperate, pathetic attempt at intimidation from a man who has suddenly realized the ground beneath him has completely vanished. You demanded the assets, Terrence, I state, my voice remaining impeccably formal and completely devoid of emotion. You assumed the liabilities. You eagerly signed a legally binding document taking sole possession of a house you cannot afford. As for the luxury sport utility vehicle, it was corporate property. I simply recovered what legally belonged to my enterprise. Terrence loses whatever remaining shred of control he had left. Through the speaker of my secured phone, the audio of his crumbling honeymoon provides a chaotic, highly satisfying soundtrack. Chloe is no longer crying, she is shrieking. I can hear the distinct sound of something heavy crashing against a wall, perhaps a lamp or a room service tray hitting the floor of their luxury suite. She is yelling at the top of her lungs about annulments. She is screaming that her personal credit card was just declined at the resort spa because she tried to cover the incidentals he could not pay for. I hear her demanding to know why she rushed into a marriage with a logistics manager who cannot even manage to keep a rental car from being towed out of a valet lot. Terrence tries to shush her, his voice muffled as he desperately covers the receiver with his hand. I hear him begging her to lower her voice, promising her that it is just a bank error, swearing that he is going to force me to fix it. When he returns to the line, his tone is venomous. The sheer humiliation of being emasculated in front of his 26-year-old bride has pushed him into a cornered, erratic rage. He realizes that basic logic has failed, so he resorts to brute force intimidation. I want you to transfer your military retirement savings to my account right now, Terrence demands, his voice shaking with a volatile mixture of fear and fury. You have your thrift savings plan. You have your pension fund. I know there is money sitting there. You owe me for wasting my youth. You owe me for putting up with your combat boots and your deployments. Wire $20,000 to my checking account by noon, or I swear to God I will make your life a living hell. I do not flinch. I take another slow sip of my black coffee, watching the morning light filter through the small window of my military housing unit. I am sitting in a cinder block room completely at peace, while he is standing in a five-star hotel suite, watching his entire life burn to the ground. You are attempting to extort a federal officer, Terrence, I remind him smoothly. I would suggest you choose your next words with extreme caution. Do not play the authority card with me, Jada, he spits back. You think that uniform protects you? I will call the military brass today. I will file a formal complaint with the Inspector General. I will tell them you are utilizing predatory legal tactics to defraud a civilian. I will spin a narrative so fast your head will spin. I will tell them you are hostile, aggressive, and financially abusive. The military hates bad publicity. They will launch an investigation. They will suspend your clearance and they will force you to settle. The irony is palpable. He truly thinks he understands how the United States Army operates because he attended a few holiday galas on my arm. He thinks he can leverage harmful stereotypes, painting me as an angry, aggressive black woman to my superiors, hoping the military hierarchy will step in to put a disobedient wife in her place. He completely underestimates my ironclad reputation. He fails to comprehend that the military brass he is threatening to call are the very same people who just authorized a multi-million-dollar defense contract for my firm. I let him expend his energy. I listen as he details exactly how he plans to destroy my military career, how he will humiliate me in front of my unit, how he will make sure I am dishonorably discharged. He is throwing every single weapon he thinks he has at the fortified wall of my silence. Are you finished? I ask, my tone perfectly, even slicing right through his frantic rambling. You have until noon, Jada, he breathes heavily into the receiver. $20,000, or I make the call. You initiated the divorce, Terrence, I state, laying out the absolute facts of his demise. You chose to rush the paperwork. You utilized a loophole to bypass the waiting period, so you could marry your mistress. You chose to sign a binding legal document, specifically waiving your right to financial discovery. You did all of this voluntarily. No one forced your hand. You dug this grave with your own sheer arrogance. He growls into the phone, the sound of a man who knows he is beaten, but refuses to surrender. Chloe screams his name in the background, demanding he get off the phone and figure out how they are going to pay for their flights back to Atlanta. I am not playing games with you, Terrence yells over her voice. Send the money. I set my coffee mug down on the table. My posture is perfectly straight. I am no longer just his ex-wife. I am a chief executive officer neutralizing a hostile threat. I am a tactical commander, eliminating a vulnerability. He wanted to play high-stakes financial warfare, and he brought a plastic knife to a drone strike. He thinks the worst thing I can do is say no. He thinks denying him the $20,000 is the extent of my retaliation. He has absolutely no idea that the financial devastation he is currently experiencing is merely the opening salvo. The bank notices and the repossessed vehicle are just the surface-level consequences of his betrayal. The true destruction is waiting just beneath the surface, heavily documented and ready to be deployed. I let his ultimatum hang in the digital silence between us. He genuinely believed that leveraging his baseless threats against my military career would cause me to panic. He thought the prospect of a formal complaint would shatter my composure. I allowed him to bask in his false sense of authority for exactly 3 seconds before I began dismantling it. I informed him that my commanding officers were the very same individuals who had just finalized a multi-million-dollar defense contract with my civilian enterprise. I told him he was more than welcome to call Fort Liberty. I even offered to provide him with the direct extension to the Inspector General. I explained that when he made that call, he would have to explicitly explain why a civilian logistics manager was attempting to extort an active duty military officer for $20,000 to pay for a honeymoon suite in Las Vegas. The line went incredibly quiet. The frantic background noise of his new wife actively destroying their luxury hotel room seemed to fade into a muffled hum. Terrence was finally beginning to realize that the rules of engagement had changed permanently. He had spent 6 years assuming I was simply a disciplined soldier he could manipulate and intimidate. I had been completely blind to the fact that my entire professional existence was built on identifying vulnerabilities and neutralizing hostile threats. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to project anger to establish dominance. I simply told him that calling my commanding officer would be a spectacular waste of his time, but there was another federal agency he urgently needed to contact. I instructed him to call the Internal Revenue Service. I heard the sharp, sudden intake of his breath through the phone speaker. The silence that followed with an impending sense of doom. I reminded him of the $40,000 he had quietly siphoned from my secondary personal savings account last November. At the time, he had fed me an elaborate lie. He claimed he was utilizing those funds to secure a high-yield logistics investment that would exponentially benefit our marital portfolio. He presented falsified projection sheets and spoke endlessly about securing our future. In reality, my proprietary security software had tracked the movement of every single dollar. He had used my money to pay down his secret high-interest credit card debt and to fund his initial lavish courtship of his luxury realtor bride. I thought because we were legally married, his financial theft would simply be categorized as a messy marital dispute. He assumed the courts would view it as commingled funds and force us to split the difference. He was catastrophically wrong. I delivered the next blow with absolute surgical precision. I explained my countermeasure to him, slowly ensuring he understood the gravity of his situation. I told him that I did not fight him to get the cash back during the divorce proceedings. I did not even bring it up to his aggressive legal team. Instead, I meticulously documented the unauthorized transfers. My forensic accounting team legally categorized the stolen $40,000 as miscellaneous taxable income. I reported the entire amount directly to the Internal Revenue Service under his Social Security number, officially classifying it as fraudulent income acquired through embezzlement. I laid out the immediate consequences of my actions mathematically. Because he had rushed our divorce to marry his mistress, we had filed our taxes separately this year. He had failed to declare that $40,000 on his individual federal tax filings. He was now actively committing federal tax evasion. The Internal Revenue Service does not operate like a family court judge. They do not care about his excuses, his smooth-talking charm, or his supposed business investments. They only care about the ledger. I informed him that the penalties, the compounding interest, and the impending federal audit would completely obliterate whatever pitiful credit score he had managed to salvage. The silence on the other end of the line was no longer just quiet. It was the sound of a man plummeting into an endless abyss. The reality of his federal tax liability was setting in. He had traded a secure, wealthy marriage for a mountain of debt, an adjustable rate mortgage. He could not afford a repossessed vehicle, and now a targeted investigation by the federal government. Terrence tried to speak, but the words failed him. He let out a ragged, stuttering breath. He had spent our entire marriage feeling insecure about my accomplishments, constantly trying to force me into a submissive, traditionally feminine role to make himself feel larger. He had demanded I shrink myself so his ego could expand. Faced with the full, unrestrained force of the empire I had built behind his back, he was completely paralyzed. "Jada, you cannot do this," he finally whispered, his voice completely devoid of the arrogance he had carried into my hospital room just 4 days ago. "You are destroying my life. You destroyed your own life, Terrence." I replied, my tone reflecting the cold reality of his choices. "You built your entire new reality on a foundation of theft and arrogance. You demanded a clean break, and I gave you exactly what you asked for. You just failed to read the fine print." In the background, the shrill voice of his new bride pierced through the audio once again. Chloe was screaming that the hotel security was knocking on their door, demanding immediate payment for the room or threatening to escort them off the premises. She was demanding to know what Terrence was going to do to fix the nightmare he had dragged her into. Terrence did not answer her. He did not say another word to me. The terror of his situation had entirely consumed him. He abruptly ended the call, hanging up the phone in a state of absolute suffocating panic. I lowered the secure device from my ear and placed it gently back onto the kitchen table. The digital connection was severed, but the tactical operation was still in motion. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the persistent ache in my ribs flare slightly before subsiding. The first wave of the ambush had been executed flawlessly. Terrence was currently stranded in a desert city with a furious new wife declining credit cards, and the looming shadow of federal tax evasion hanging over his head. But the financial devastation I had orchestrated was not limited to my ex-husband. The money he had stolen to buy that massive diamond engagement ring had to come from somewhere, and his own personal accounts had been empty for months. I knew exactly where he had sourced those funds, and I knew that the collateral damage of his betrayal was about to strike his own family. I picked up my coffee mug, taking a final satisfying sip of the dark roast. I did not have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes after Terrence disconnected his call in sheer terror, my secure phone began to ring again. The caller identification flashed across the encrypted screen. It was not Terrence calling back to beg for mercy. It was his older brother David. The second phase of the liquidation was beginning right on schedule. I let the digital silence settle over the small cinder-block room. Terrence hanging up the phone was the sound of a man plummeting into an endless abyss. I take my empty coffee mug to the small sink and rinse it out with deliberate, measured movements. The first wave of the ambush has been executed flawlessly. Terrence is currently stranded in a desert city with a furious new wife declining credit cards and the looming shadow of federal tax evasion hanging over his head. But I know the collateral damage of his betrayal is already rippling outward. The money he stole had to come from somewhere. Exactly 10 minutes later, the secure phone resting on the kitchen table vibrates violently. The caller identification flashes across the encrypted screen. It is David, Terrence's older brother. David is a man who has always prided himself on being the patriarch of their family. He is a successful business owner who always looked down on my military career as some sort of rigid, low-paying government gig. He and Sarah were a match set of suburban entitlement, perfectly content to judge my life from the comfort of their manicured lawns. I accept the call. I do not offer a polite greeting. Jada, what is going on? David is not asking a question. He is pleading. His voice is shaking so violently I can hear his breath hitching over the receiver. The smooth, polished, condescending tone he usually reserves for me has been entirely eradicated. He sounds like a man watching his house burn down. I remain perfectly still. Tell me what is happening, David. Sarah went to the bank branch this morning, he stammers, the sheer panic bleeding through every syllable. She went to deposit the $15,000 check you wrote her. She handed it to the teller and the teller asked her to wait. Then the branch manager came out. Jada, they escorted her into a private office. They told her that our entire financial estate has been frozen, every single account. Our personal checking, our joint savings, the primary operating accounts for my business. Everything is locked under a mandatory federal fraud review. David pauses, struggling to catch his breath. He is operating under the assumption that I am the architect of a petty revenge scheme. He actually thinks I bounced the personal check to humiliate his wife. You have to call your bank, Jada, he begs. You have to tell them to lift the hold. I know you are angry at Terrence. I know you are hurt that Sarah came over there and demanded the money while you were recovering. But you cannot destroy my business over a family dispute. I have payroll to run on Friday. I have vendors to pay. If my accounts stay frozen, my company will go under by the end of the week. Please, Jada, just authorize the $15,000 so they will unfreeze my estate. I listen to the sheer terror in his voice. He is a man watching his entire life's work evaporate in real time, and he is begging the very woman his family just discarded to save him. I did not stop the payment, David. I state, my voice projecting absolute, unwavering authority. The check I handed to your wife was drawn from a Tier 1 corporate holding account with infinite liquidity. It was perfectly valid. It cleared my institution the exact second Sarah handed it to that teller. I can hear the confusion temporarily overriding his panic. But the branch manager said the deposit triggered a critical fraud alert. He said it flagged a severe discrepancy in our financial routing history. It did, I confirmed smoothly. But the fraud alert did not originate from my institution, David. It originated from yours. I let that reality sink in for a fraction of a second before I deliver the surgical strike. I explained the mechanics of the ambush to him with the precision of a tactical briefing. I tell him that my forensic accountants possess the capability to trace the digital footprint of any transaction that interacts with my corporate firewall. When Sarah deposited that check, my security software automatically verified the destination routing numbers against the original source of the alleged loan. Terrence told you that he needed to borrow $15,000 to cover my out-of-network medical deductibles for my trauma care, I say, laying out the absolute facts of his brother's betrayal. He told you I was a financial burden. David whispers, his voice barely audible. He said your military insurance denied the claims. As an active duty military officer, my healthcare covers every single dime of my hospitalization. I correct him. I do not have out-of-network deductibles. I did not need a loan. I never asked Terrence for a single cent. The silence on the line grows incredibly heavy. David is beginning to put the pieces together, and the picture forming in his mind is horrifying. I instruct David to open his business ledger. I tell him to look at the exact date and time Terrence initiated the wire transfer from his joint business account. Terrence did not transfer that money to a hospital billing department. I explain, my tone mercilessly objective. He wired those funds directly to a luxury jeweler in Buckhead. He used your business operating capital to purchase a massive custom diamond engagement ring for a 26-year-old luxury realtor named Chloe. He embezzled from your company to fund his double life, and he used my near-fatal accident as his flawless cover story. I hear a sharp, devastated intake of breath on the other end of the line. When Sarah deposited my reimbursement check into your account today, my forensic team simply provided your banking institution with the irrefutable digital proof of the original fraudulent wire transfer. We highlighted the discrepancy. Your bank realized that one of the primary signatories on your business account had committed wire fraud to purchase civilian jewelry. They froze your entire estate because your business is now an active crime scene. David does not yell. He does not curse. He simply begins to weep. It is a quiet, soul-crushing sound over the phone. He had trusted his younger brother implicitly. He had allowed Sarah to march into my home and degrade me fully, believing they held the moral high ground. He had looked down on my military service, assuming my life was small and insignificant. Now he was realizing that his own flesh and blood had bankrupted his family to buy a mistress a diamond ring. David chokes out the weight of the betrayal, completely shattering his composure. What am I supposed to do? Sarah is hysterical. My business is locked. Terrence will not answer his phone. I look at the blank cinderblock wall of my temporary housing unit. I feel absolutely no pity for the man on the other end of the line. He and Sarah had been perfectly willing to watch me drown, so long as it kept their suburban illusion intact. You should probably call a very good criminal defense attorney, David. I advise him, my voice completely devoid of warmth. And I would suggest you stop taking financial advice from a man who brings a plastic knife to a drone strike. I end the call. The digital connection severs, leaving me in the quiet sanctuary of my room. The dominoes are no longer just falling. They have completely leveled the playing field. Terrence has destroyed his own marriage, his financial future, and his brother's livelihood, all in a span of 4 days. The board is perfectly set for the final execution. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the soft hum of the live jazz band cease entirely. Every single eye in the opulent dining hall snaps toward the entrance. I am wearing a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit that projects absolute executive authority. I do not look like a discarded and battered ex-wife. I look like the architect of their destruction. The sheer expense of the room is staggering. There are towering floral centerpieces and elaborate ice sculptures, all funded by the absolute last drops of David and Sarah's frozen credit lines. They are throwing a desperate celebration of a fraudulent life, and I have arrived to present the bill. Sarah is the first to break the heavy silence. She marches across the polished hardwood floor, her face flushed with a volatile mixture of rage and panic. Terrence and Chloe are right behind her. Chloe is wearing a highly embellished white reception dress clinging tightly to Terrence's arm. Terrence looks like a cornered animal recognizing the hunter. He expected me to be hiding in a cinderblock military housing unit crying over my lost marriage. I did not expect me to track him down to the sanctuary of his country club facade. Sarah stops just inches from me. She points a manicured finger directly at my chest. You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Jada. Sarah hisses, her voice trembling with fury. You bounced that check and ruined our accounts. You need to call your bank right now and authorize them to unfreeze my estate. We have vendors demanding payment for this reception. Chloe steps forward, emboldened by the presence of her affluent guests. She looks me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. You do not belong here, you broke dropout, Chloe spits. Terrence is done paying for your pathetic life. You need to leave before we have security drag you out. I do not raise my voice. I do not react to the insults. I simply reach into my leather briefcase and pull out a pristine, thick leather-bound financial dossier. I bypass Sarah and Chloe, entirely holding the heavy document out directly to Terrence. He hesitates, his hands shaking visibly, before he slowly reaches out and takes it. I turn my attention to the crowded room. My voice projects with flawless military command, carrying clearly across the silent banquet hall. Everyone is listening. Terrence assumed my army salary was my only source of income. I state, ensuring every word lands with devastating precision. He spent 6 years believing that my government pay scale was the absolute limit of my potential. He failed to realize that military regulations permit officers to own and operate civilian enterprises. I look back at Terrence. Open it, Terrence. He flips the heavy leather cover. His eyes frantically scan the first page and the last drop of color drains from his face. His jaw goes slack. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Cyber Defense, I announce to the room. My annual net compensation exceeds $700,000. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd of Atlanta elites. Chloe looks utterly confused, leaning over to stare at the financial spreadsheets over his shoulder. I step closer to him, locking eyes with the man who thought he could destroy me. Because you were in such a frantic rush to finalize our divorce so you could marry your mistress, you utilized a highly questionable legal loophole to bypass the waiting period. You eagerly signed a binding asset division agreement to take a house you cannot afford and a corporate vehicle you did not own. By doing so, you permanently and legally waived your right to any financial discovery. I watched the realization crush him in real time. You locked yourself out of a multi-million-dollar empire to secure an adjustable rate mortgage that is currently forcing you into foreclosure, I say. Terrence cannot speak. He is paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. I do not give him a moment to recover. I turn my gaze to Sarah and to David, who is standing a few feet away looking completely broken. Sarah, you demanded to know why your banking institution froze your entire financial estate. I say, my tone merciless. The bank locked your accounts because the $15,000 Terrence claimed he borrowed to pay for my medical bills was a complete fabrication. As an active duty officer, my trauma care was fully covered. I did not owe a single dime. I point directly at Chloe's left hand. Terrence actually stole that seed money directly from your joint business operating account. He used your company payroll funds to purchase Chloe's custom diamond engagement ring. My forensic accountant simply provided your bank with the irrefutable digital proof of the original fraudulent wire transfer. Your business accounts are frozen because your brother-in-law committed wire fraud against you to fund his double life. Chloe gasps, sharply looking down at the massive diamond on her finger, as if the metal is suddenly burning her skin. She jerks her hand away from Terrence. Is that true? She demands, her voice shrill with panic. Tell me that is not true. Terrence remains entirely mute, clutching the dossier like a shield that offers absolutely no protection. Sarah turns slowly to look at her brother-in-law, her expression morphing from anger directed at me to absolute horrified realization directed at him. Before Terrence can formulate a single excuse, before Sarah can unleash her fury, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the dining hall swing open with tremendous force. The jazz band members actually step back from their instruments. Two federal marshals, accompanied by local law enforcement officers, step into the venue. Their tactical presence contrasts violently with the soft, opulent country club environment. They scan the room rapidly. They are not looking for me. They are looking directly at the groom. Terrence assumed my military salary was the absolute ceiling of my potential. I declare, letting my words echo against the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers of the banquet hall. He spent 6 years believing that my government pay scale dictated my entire worth. He complained that my career was a burden. He mocked my combat boots and my deployments, assuming I was nothing more than an underpaid public servant he was forced to tolerate. I take a slow, measured step forward, the sharp click of my heels commanding the total attention of the room. What Terrence failed to realize is that the United States military does not just train soldiers. They train tactical strategists. And military regulations explicitly permit active duty officers to own and operate civilian holding companies provided there is no conflict of interest. I was so incredibly eager to diminish me to make me feel small, so he could feel large, that he never bothered to look past the uniform. I turn my gaze directly to the man standing frozen before me. Open the dossier, Terrence. He does not want to do it. Every instinct in his body is screaming at him to throw the leather-bound folder onto the floor and run. He looks at Sarah, whose furious expression has suddenly morphed into deep, unsettling confusion. He looks at Chloe, who is gripping his arm so tightly her knuckles are turning white. Finally, with hands trembling so violently he can barely grip the binding, Terrence flips open the heavy leather cover. His eyes dart to the first page. It is not a complicated legal document. It is a highly simplified, certified statement of net worth and executive compensation prepared specifically by my wealth management attorney for this exact moment. I watch the physical manifestation of a man's ego collapsing in real time. The last remaining drop of color drains entirely from Terrence's face. His jaw goes slack. The breath leaves his lungs in a sharp, audible gasp. His knees actually buckle for a fraction of a second before he forces himself to stand straight. He is staring at a string of commas and zeros that completely obliterate his entire understanding of reality. I turn my attention back to the crowd of affluent guests. Many of them are high-level executives and investors who move in Atlanta's elite business circles. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Cyber Defense. I announce, my voice carrying absolute, indisputable authority. My firm holds active multi-million-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense. My annual net compensation after corporate taxes and employee payroll exceeds $700,000. My current personal net worth sits at $4.5 million. A collective stunned gasp ripples through the crowd. I see several men in expensive tuxedos exchange shocked glances. They recognize the company name. Aegis is a major player in the southeastern cybersecurity sector, and up until this very second, the identity of its sole proprietor had been a closely guarded corporate secret. Chloe lets out a strangled, high-pitched sound. The word million acts like a physical trigger for her. She leans over Terrence's shoulder, her eyes frantically scanning the financial spreadsheets illuminated by the ambient light of the ballroom. She is a luxury realtor. She knows exactly how to read a financial disclosure. I watch her track the numbers, her brain visibly short-circuiting as she processes the magnitude of the wealth she is looking at. She thought she was stealing a high-value, successful logistics manager from a financially struggling soldier. She thought she had secured her bag. Now, staring at my certified corporate filings, she realizes she rushed into a marriage with a broke man who just voluntarily walked away from a multi-million-dollar empire. The panic setting into her features is absolutely magnificent. I step closer to Terrence, narrowing the distance between us until I am standing just inches away from him. He cannot even bring himself to look me in the eye. He is staring blankly at the paper, his mind utterly incapable of processing the catastrophic error he has made. Because you were in such a frantic, desperate rush to finalize our divorce so you could marry your mistress. You utilized a highly questionable legal loophole to bypass the standard waiting period. I say, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register, meant entirely for him. You brought a preliminary asset division agreement into a military trauma ward while I was recovering from a brain injury. You eagerly signed that document, taking sole possession of a house you cannot afford and a corporate vehicle you did not own. I let the silence hang for a single beat, allowing the gravity of his actions to settle heavily onto his shoulders. By doing so, you legally and permanently waived your right to any formal financial discovery, I state, spelling out the absolute finality of his demise. In the state of Georgia, rushing a divorce with a signed preliminary settlement means you accept the marital assets exactly as they are known to you. You wanted a clean break. You wanted to leave me with nothing. So you signed a binding legal contract that officially locked you out of my entire corporate structure. Terrence finally drags his eyes up from the dossier to look at me. His face is a mask of absolute, unadulterated devastation. The sheer terror in his eyes is palpable. He opens his mouth to speak, but no sound comes out. His vocal cords are completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. You locked yourself out of a multi-million-dollar empire just to secure an adjustable rate mortgage that is actively pushing you into pre-foreclosure as we speak. I tell him, ensuring every word cuts deeper than the last. You traded half of a thriving defense contracting firm for a mountain of high-interest debt and a repossessed luxury lease. You dug your own grave with your arrogance, Terrence. I just handed you the shovel. Chloe takes a staggering step backward. She looks at Terrence with an expression of pure, unfiltered revulsion. The illusion of his wealth, the carefully curated image of the successful businessman she thought she had trapped, shatters completely. She is looking at a man who is about to be buried under a mountain of financial ruin. Sarah is standing frozen, her mouth slightly open. The arrogant, condescending sister-in-law who had marched into my temporary housing unit to demand $15,000 is now staring at a woman who could buy her entire suburban existence in cash. She looks from me to Terrence, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. If Terrence is completely broke, if he is losing the house and the car, then the money he used to fund this extravagant wedding and buy Chloe's ring had to come from somewhere else. I shift my gaze from Terrence's shattered face to Sarah and then to David, who is standing completely motionless near the edge of the dance floor. The time has come to address the stolen funds, to reveal the final layer of the betrayal, and to watch the absolute last of Terrence's lifelines violently snap. I turn my attention away from the shattered man in front of me and fix my gaze entirely on Sarah. She is standing near the edge of the polished dance floor. The aggressive, entitled posture she carried into my temporary military housing unit has completely evaporated. She no longer looks like the affluent, untouchable suburban wife. She looks like a woman who has suddenly realized she is standing on a trapdoor. I take a slow, deliberate step toward her. The silence in the country club dining room is absolute. The elite guests of Atlanta are holding their collective breath, watching the destruction of a man unfold with forensic precision. Sarah, I begin projecting my voice so that every single guest in the venue can hear the exact nature of her family's betrayal. 72 hours ago, you marched into my home. You stood in my living room while I was recovering from a traumatic brain injury and fractured ribs. You pointed your finger at me and demanded that I write you a check for $15,000. You told me that Terrence was forced to borrow that money from your husband to cover the out-of-network medical deductibles for my trauma care. You mocked my military service. You told me your brother-in-law was moving on to a woman who actually brought value to the table. Sarah swallows hard. The color drains from her face. She looks around the room, acutely aware of the wealthy investors and corporate executives listening to every word. I keep my eyes locked on hers. As an active duty military officer, my healthcare covers every single dime of my hospitalization. I do not have out-of-network deductibles. I never asked Terrence for a single cent. He did not borrow that money to save my life. He lied to you, Sarah. He lied to your husband. He stole that money directly from your joint business operating account. I shift my gaze to David. Terrence's older brother looks physically ill. He is a man who prides himself on his business acumen, and he has just realized his own flesh and blood has bankrupted his company. Earlier today, you called me in a panic, David. I say, my tone mercilessly objective. You begged me to authorize the personal check I wrote to your wife, because your banking institution had suddenly frozen your entire financial estate. You told me your payroll accounts were locked, and your business was going to collapse by the end of the week. I am telling you right now that the check I wrote was perfectly valid. It cleared my corporate holding account the exact second Sarah handed it to her teller. David takes a shaky step forward. Then why did the bank freeze everything, he asks, his voice barely a whisper. Because my forensic accounting team traced the digital footprint of your brother's theft, I explain. When Sarah deposited my reimbursement check, my security software automatically verified the destination routing numbers against the original source of the alleged loan. We provided your bank with irrefutable digital proof of a fraudulent wire transfer initiated by Terrence. Your accounts are frozen because your business is now an active crime scene. I turn my body slightly and point directly at Chloe's left hand. The young luxury realtor is gripping Terrence's arm, but her fingers are trembling. Terrence did not wire your $15,000 to a hospital billing department, I state, ensuring my articulation is razor sharp. He wired your business operating capital directly to a high-end jeweler in Buckhead. He used your company payroll funds to purchase that custom diamond engagement ring, currently sitting on his new bride's finger. The reaction is instantaneous and catastrophic. Chloe gasps, staring down at her hand as if the diamond has suddenly turned into a glowing ember. She physically recoils from Terrence, taking 3 rapid steps backward until she collides with a table of untouched champagne glasses. The crystal flutes rattle ominously. Tell me she is lying, Terrence, Chloe demands, her voice cracking with a high hysterical pitch. Tell me you did not buy my ring with stolen money. Tell me you are not broke. Terrence cannot look at her. He is clutching the leather-bound dossier containing my certified net worth to his chest, like a shield that offers absolutely no protection. He opens his mouth, trying to formulate an excuse, trying to utilize the smooth-talking charm he has relied on his entire life. He stammers about temporary liquidity issues and short-term logistical investments. He tries to say he was going to pay his brother back as soon as he closed a new contract. The lies fall flat, dying in the heavy judgmental air of the country club. Sarah turns her fury entirely onto Terrence. The white affluent sister-in-law completely loses whatever remains of her country club decorum. She steps into Terrence's personal space, her face contorted with rage. You stole from us! Sarah shrieks, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You sat at our dining table and told David your wife was draining your savings. You told us Jada was a financial burden. You took the money we had set aside for our own employees so you could play a rich man in Las Vegas. My credit cards are declining at the grocery store, Terrence. We trusted you. David moves forward and places a heavy hand on his wife's shoulder, pulling her back before she physically attacks his brother. David looks at Terrence with an expression of pure unadulterated heartbreak and disgust. I defended you, David says, his voice thick with emotion. I co-signed the loan for your first logistics company when your credit was garbage. I welcomed you into my business when you needed a fresh start. You used my company accounts as your personal piggy bank to fund an affair. You let my wife march into a military housing unit to extort a woman recovering from a brain injury. You are not my brother anymore. You are a liability. Terrence is entirely surrounded by the wreckage of his own design. He looks at me, his eyes wide and desperate. He is silently begging me to stop, to show mercy, to end the public execution. But I am a tactical commander, and I do not leave a hostile threat partially neutralized. You wanted a woman who brought value to the table, Terrence, I say, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. You rushed a courthouse divorce and utilized predatory legal tactics to leave me with nothing. You demanded a clean break. You wanted to take the house and the luxury vehicle, completely failing to realize the house had an adjustable rate mortgage that is now pushing you into foreclosure, and the vehicle was a corporate lease that I have already repossessed. You traded half of a multi-million-dollar defense contracting firm for a stolen ring and a mountain of high-interest debt. Chloe covers her face with her hands. The reality of her situation is crushing her. She is a 26-year-old woman who thought she was marrying into wealth. She is now legally bound to a man with an unfunded mortgage, zero equity, no vehicle, and who is actively under a federal fraud review for embezzling from his own family. She looks at the lavish floral arrangements and the expensive ice sculptures decorating the room, suddenly realizing that they have absolutely no way to pay the venue for this reception. The destruction is absolute. Terrence has been stripped of his assets, his family's support, his new wife's respect, and his dignity. He is standing in the middle of a room filled with Atlanta's elite business community, completely exposed as a fraud and a thief. He drops the heavy leather dossier onto the polished hardwood floor. It lands with a heavy final thud. He looks at me, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "Jada, please," he whispers, his voice cracking. "I made a mistake. I was stressed. I was not thinking clearly. You have to help me fix this. We were married for 6 years. You have the money. You can cover the 15,000. You can pay off the mortgage. Please do not do this to me." I look at him with perfect chilling detachment. I do not feel anger. I do not feel sadness. I feel the profound, undisturbed peace of a perfectly executed operation. "I am just an army officer, Terrence," I reply smoothly. "I make $5,000 a month." Before Terrence can fall to his knees, before Sarah can scream another insult, and before Chloe can demand an annulment, a sudden commotion at the entrance draws everyone's attention. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the dining hall swing open with tremendous force. 2 federal marshals dressed in dark tactical gear step into the opulent venue. They are accompanied by local law enforcement officers. Their presence is a violent contrast to the soft, affluent environment of the country club. They scan the silent, stunned crowd. They are not looking for me. They lock eyes directly on the groom. The guests part, immediately clearing a wide path across the polished hardwood floor. The federal marshals move with absolute purpose. Their heavy tactical boots thud in perfect synchronization, completely shattering the lingering silence of the country club. They do not glance at the extravagant floral arrangements or the terrified members of Atlanta elite. They walk straight past Sarah, who shrinks back against her husband. They walk straight past me. They stop directly in front of Terrence. Terrence is paralyzed. The leather-bound financial dossier slips entirely from his numb fingers and hits the floor. He looks at the 2 federal agents, his breath coming in shallow, erratic gasps. Terrence Jenkins, the lead marshal, states, his voice projecting with undeniable authority. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest." The words drop like anvils in the center of the ballroom. Chloe lets out a sharp cry, physically pulling her hands away from Terrence, as if his sudden toxicity might somehow transfer to her. David steps instinctively in front of his wife, shielding Sarah from the impending arrest of his own brother. Terrence shakes his head wildly. His eyes dart from the marshals to me, his mind desperately scrambling to construct a narrative that will save him. "There is a mistake," Terrence stammers, his voice cracking horribly. "I am just a logistics manager. I am getting married today. You have the wrong man. I have not done anything. Jada, tell them there is a mistake. Tell them you are angry about the divorce." He is actually begging the woman he discarded to provide him with an alibi. He is hoping I will claim this is a domestic dispute, a petty act of revenge that law enforcement should ignore. He does not understand that I do not manipulate the law, I utilize it. The second marshal steps forward, unhooking the heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "There is no mistake. You are being formally indicted on 2 counts of felony wire fraud, 1 count of unauthorized cyber intrusion on a restricted federal network, and felony tax evasion. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The charges echo off the vaulted ceilings. Tax evasion, cyber intrusion, wire fraud. The guests begin to murmur intensely. These are not minor misdemeanors. These are federal crimes that carry mandatory minimum sentences in federal prison. Terrence refuses to turn around. He stares at me, sheer terror radiating from his entire body. "Jada, what did you do?" he pleads, the tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "You called them. You set me up." I do not step back. I stand my ground, my posture impeccably straight, looking down at the man who thought he could completely dismantle my life without consequence. "I did not set you up, Terrence," I reply, making sure my voice is loud enough for every single guest and federal agent in the room to hear perfectly. I merely allowed you to act on your own unchecked arrogance. 4 days ago, you called me in a panic from your luxury honeymoon suite in Las Vegas. You were furious because the bank had issued a pre-foreclosure warning on the house you demanded in our divorce, and my corporate retrieval team had rightfully repossessed my vehicle. You demanded that I wire you $20,000 from my military retirement savings to pay for your hotel room. When I refused, you threatened to call my commanding officer and destroy my military career. The crowd listens with rapt attention. They are witnessing the complete autopsy of a fraudulent man. When your threats failed to intimidate me, you resorted to absolute desperation. You utilized your hotel internet connection to launch a frantic series of hacking attempts against my private financial network. You attempted to force entry into an old joint checking account, hoping to bypass the security protocols and drain what you incorrectly assumed was my life savings. Terrence goes completely rigid. He remembers the frantic login attempts. He remembers sitting in the dark of his honeymoon suite, desperately guessing passwords, while Chloe screamed at him in the background. What you failed to realize, Terrence, is that the account you were trying to compromise was visually linked to my primary military direct deposit portal, I explained smoothly. My proprietary cyber defense software immediately flagged your internet protocol address. I did not block your access. I simply engaged a federal tracking protocol. My system silently documented every single keystroke you made. It packaged the digital evidence of your unauthorized cyber intrusion and transmitted it directly to federal authorities. You committed a federal cybercrime against an active duty military officer and a defense contractor. I did not call the marshals, Terrence. Your own keyboard strokes dispatched them. The lead marshal grasps Terrence by the shoulder and forcibly turns him around. Terrence offers no physical resistance. His spirit has been entirely broken. The heavy steel handcuffs click shut around his wrists with a sharp, undeniable finality. But that does not explain the tax evasion, David calls out from the edge of the dance floor. Terrence's older brother looks utterly destroyed, but the need to understand the full scope of the betrayal overrides his shock. Why are they charging him with tax evasion? I shift my attention to David. Terrence embezzled $40,000 from my secondary personal savings account last November, I state clearly. He lied to me, claiming he was utilizing those funds to secure a high-yield logistics investment. In reality, he used my money to pay down his secret high-interest credit card debt and to fund his lavish courtship of Chloe. I did not fight him for the cash during our rushed divorce proceedings. Instead, my forensic accounting team legally categorized the stolen $40,000 as miscellaneous taxable income. I reported the entire amount directly to the Internal Revenue Service under his Social Security number. I look back at Terrence, who is now being read his rights by the arresting officers. Because you rushed our divorce to marry your mistress, you filed your taxes separately this year. You failed to declare that $40,000 in embezzled funds on your individual federal tax filings. The Internal Revenue Service initiated an immediate audit. When they looked into your accounts, they did not just find the money you stole from me. They found the $15,000 you embezzled from your brother's business operating account. You handed the federal government an absolute perfectly documented trail of wire fraud and tax evasion. The reality of his situation crashes down upon the entire room. Terrence is not just broke, he is facing the complete and total loss of his freedom. He will not be sleeping in a luxury hotel suite or a sprawling Atlanta estate. He will be sleeping in a federal holding cell. The assets he fought so desperately to keep are entirely worthless to him now. This is the consequence of treating people as stepping stones. Terrence, I say, delivering the final devastating truth. You spent 6 years trying to diminish my light so your shadow could look larger. You thought my combat boots and my deployments made me less valuable. You wanted a woman who brought value to the table, but you were entirely too blind to recognize that I owned the table, the chairs, and the building we were sitting in. The marshals begin to march Terrence toward the heavy mahogany doors. He drags his feet, his head hanging low, the custom-tailored ivory tuxedo looking absurdly out of place alongside the dark tactical gear of his captors. He is a man who traded a secure, wealthy marriage for a fraudulent illusion, and now the illusion has violently shattered. As they pull him past me, Terrence stops. He looks at me with desperate, tear-filled eyes. The arrogance is completely gone, replaced by the pathetic whimpering of a man who knows he is entirely out of options. Jada, please, Terrence begs, his voice breaking into a sob. Please, we are family. I made a mistake. I am so sorry. You have the money. You have the influence. You can call your lawyers. You can bail me out. Please do not let them take me. I look at him. I look at the man who left me in a trauma ward with fractured ribs. I look at the man who proudly flaunted his infidelity and threatened to destroy my military career to pay for his honeymoon. I feel absolutely no pity. I feel no anger. I feel the profound, undisturbed peace of a perfectly executed tactical operation. I am just an army officer, Terrence, I reply, my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of mercy. I turn my back on him. The marshals do not wait for another plea. They shove Terrence forward, escorting him out of the grand dining hall and into the warm Georgia night. The heavy doors swing shut behind them, sealing his fate. The silence in the room returns, but it is no longer the silence of shock. It is the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute awe. I turn my attention to Chloe. The 26-year-old luxury realtor is standing alone near the center of the room. Her hands are shaking violently. She looks down at the massive custom diamond engagement ring sitting on her left hand. It is no longer a symbol of wealth and status. It is a piece of stolen property. It is the physical manifestation of wire fraud. Chloe reaches across her body. With frantic, trembling fingers, she grips the diamond ring and rips it off her finger. The metal scrapes aggressively against her skin. She stares at the ring for a fraction of a second before she winds her arm back and hurls the piece of jewelry directly at the polished hardwood floor. The diamond strikes the wood with a sharp, aggressive crack, bouncing and skittering away into the shadows of the banquet hall. I am getting an annulment! Chloe screams, her voice cracking with sheer hysteria. I am calling a lawyer right now. I am not going to prison for him. I had no idea the money was stolen. I am not taking his debt. She does not wait for a response from David or Sarah. She does not look at the affluent guests who are watching her complete breakdown. Chloe grabs the heavy skirts of her embellished white reception dress, hoists them up, and sprints towards the side exit. She bursts through the patio doors and disappears into the night, abandoning the fraudulent life she had so eagerly tried to steal. David and Sarah are left standing alone on the dance floor. Sarah looks completely broken. The haughty, condescending woman who had marched into my military housing unit just a week ago is entirely gone. She realizes that her husband's business is frozen. Their credit lines are maxed out to pay for a wedding reception that just ended in a federal arrest, and her brother-in-law is a convicted felon. She looks at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization of how badly she miscalculated her target. She opens her mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg for financial mercy. But David places a firm hand on her arm. He shakes his head slowly. He knows there is absolutely no grace left to be granted. I adjust the cuffs of my custom-tailored suit. My operation is complete. The hostile threat has been fully neutralized. I do not offer any final words of advice to David or Sarah. I simply turn on my heel and walk toward the main entrance. The crowd of wealthy investors and corporate executives instinctively parts for me, offering a wide, respectful path. They do not see a discarded wife. They see a commanding officer and a chief executive who just executed a flawless, devastating financial ambush. I step through the heavy mahogany doors and walk out into the warm, humid Georgia night. The flashing red and blue lights of the law enforcement vehicles are already fading into the distance, carrying Terrence away to his new reality. I walk down the sweeping concrete steps of the country club. A sleek black town car is idling quietly near the valet stand, waiting exactly where I requested it. The driver steps out immediately, offering a respectful nod as he opens the rear passenger door for me. I slide into the luxurious leather interior, and the door clicks shut, insulating me from the chaos I left behind. As the town car smoothly pulls away from the curb and glides down the manicured driveway, I reach into my briefcase and pull out my encrypted tactical tablet. The screen illuminates the dark interior of the vehicle. A priority notification flashes across the top of the display. It is an automated confirmation from the Department of Defense. The $12 million contract expansion for Aegis Cyber Defense has officially been finalized and fully executed. I read the confirmation receipt, noting the string of zeros being added to my corporate holding accounts. I do not smile. I simply lock the screen, slide the tablet back into my briefcase, and lean my head against the cool leather headrest. I look out the tinted window, watching the city lights of Atlanta blur past. The pain in my fractured ribs is still there, a dull reminder of the physical wreckage I survived. But emotionally, financially, and tactically, I am entirely whole. For the first time in 6 long years, I close my eyes and experience absolute undisturbed peace. The affluent guests part, immediately clearing a wide path across the polished hardwood floor. The federal marshals move with absolute purpose. Their heavy tactical boots thud in perfect synchronization, completely shattering the lingering silence of the country club. They are wearing dark tactical vests that stand in sharp contrast to the white linen table settings and the pastel floral arrangements surrounding the dance floor. They do not glance at the extravagant decor or the terrified members of the Atlanta elite. They walk straight past Sarah, who shrinks back against her husband in sheer terror. They walk straight past me without a single nod. They stop directly in front of Terrence. Terrence is entirely paralyzed. The pristine leather-bound financial dossier slips completely from his numb fingers and hits the floor with a heavy thud. The documents detailing my $700,000 salary scatter across the wood. He looks at the 2 federal agents, his breath coming in shallow, erratic gasps that echo in the quiet room. Terrence Jenkins, the lead marshal, states, his voice projecting with an undeniable gravelly authority. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest." The words drop like heavy iron anvils in the exact center of the ballroom. Chloe lets out a sharp, piercing cry, physically pulling her hands away from Terrence, as if his sudden legal toxicity might somehow transfer to her. David steps instinctively in front of his wife, raising his arm to shield Sarah from the impending arrest of his own brother. Terrence shakes his head wildly. His eyes dart desperately from the marshals to me, his mind frantically scrambling to construct a narrative that will magically save him from the consequences of his own actions. "There is a mistake," Terrence stammers, his voice cracking horribly. "I am just a civilian logistics manager. I am getting married today. You definitely have the wrong man. I have not done anything illegal." "Jada, tell them there is a massive mistake. Tell them you are just angry about the divorce." He is actually begging the woman he discarded to provide him with a fictitious alibi. He is hoping I will claim this is nothing more than a messy domestic dispute, a petty act of revenge that law enforcement should simply ignore. He still fundamentally does not understand that I do not manipulate the law. I utilize it with absolute military precision. The second marshal steps forward, unhooking the heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The metallic clink is the loudest sound in the venue. "There is no mistake. You are being formally indicted on 2 counts of felony wire fraud, 1 count of unauthorized cyber intrusion on a restricted federal network, and felony tax evasion. Turn around and place your hands securely behind your back." The devastating charges echo off the vaulted ceilings of the banquet hall. Tax evasion, cyber intrusion, wire fraud. The affluent guests begin to murmur intensely, exchanging horrified glances. These are not minor local misdemeanors. These are severe federal crimes that carry mandatory minimum sentences in federal prison. Terrence refuses to turn around. He stares at me, sheer unfiltered terror radiating from his entire body. "Jada, what did you do?" he pleads, the tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his face. "You called them to punish me. You set me up." I do not take a single step back. I stand my ground, my posture impeccably straight, looking down at the man who truly thought he could completely dismantle my life without facing a single consequence. "I did not set you up, Terrence," I reply, making sure my voice is loud and clear enough for every single guest and federal agent in the room to hear perfectly. "I merely allowed you to act on your own unchecked arrogance. 4 days ago, you called me in a panic from your luxury honeymoon suite in Las Vegas. You were furious because the bank had issued a pre-foreclosure warning on the house you demanded in our divorce. and my corporate retrieval team had rightfully repossessed my vehicle. You aggressively demanded that I wire you $20,000 from my military retirement savings to pay for your hotel room. When I refused, you threatened to call my commanding officer and destroy my military career with false allegations of financial abuse. The crowd listens with rapt, breathless attention. They are witnessing the complete and total autopsy of a fraudulent man. When your threats failed to intimidate me, I continue. You resorted to absolute desperation. You utilized your hotel internet connection to launch a frantic series of hacking attempts against my private financial network. You attempted to force entry into an old joint checking account, hoping to bypass the security protocols and drain what you incorrectly assumed was my life savings. Terrence goes completely rigid. His eyes widen as he remembers the frantic login attempts. He remembers sitting in the dark of his honeymoon suite, desperately guessing passwords and answering security questions, while Chloe screamed at him in the background about declining credit cards. What you failed to realize, Terrence, is that the account you were trying to compromise was visually linked to my primary military direct deposit portal. I explained smoothly, laying out the mechanics of his demise. My proprietary cyber defense software immediately flagged your internet protocol address. I did not block your access. I simply engaged a federal tracking protocol. My system silently documented every single keystroke you made. It packaged the digital evidence of your unauthorized cyber intrusion under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and transmitted it directly to federal authorities. You committed a severe federal cybercrime against an active duty military officer and a defense contractor. I did not call the marshals, Terrence. Your own keyboard strokes dispatched them to this venue. The lead marshal grasps Terrence by the shoulder and forcibly turns him around. Terrence offers absolutely no physical resistance. His spirit has been entirely broken by the sheer weight of his own hubris. The heavy steel handcuffs click shut around his wrists, securing his arms behind his back with a sharp, undeniable finality. But that does not explain the tax evasion, David calls out from the edge of the dance floor. Terrence's older brother looks utterly destroyed, but the desperate need to understand the full scope of the betrayal overrides his immediate shock. Why are they charging him with tax evasion, Jada? I shift my attention to David, addressing him with professional detachment. Terrence embezzled $40,000 from my secondary personal savings account last November, I state clearly. He lied to me, claiming he was utilizing those funds to secure a high-yield logistics investment. In reality, he used my money to pay down his secret high-interest credit card debt and to fund his lavish initial courtship of Chloe. I did not fight him for the cash during our rushed divorce proceedings. Instead, my forensic accounting team legally categorized the stolen $40,000 as miscellaneous taxable income. I reported the entire amount directly to the Internal Revenue Service under his Social Security number. I look back at Terrence, who is now being read his Miranda rights by the arresting officers. Because you rushed our divorce to marry your mistress, you filed your taxes separately this year. You failed to declare that $40,000 in embezzled funds on your individual federal tax filings. The Internal Revenue Service initiated an immediate audit of your finances. When they looked into your accounts, they did not just find the money you stole from me. They found the $15,000 you embezzled from your brother's business operating account. You handed the federal government an absolute, perfectly documented digital trail of wire fraud and tax evasion. The devastating reality of his situation crashes down upon the entire room. Terrence is not just broke and publicly humiliated. He is facing the complete and total loss of his freedom. He will not be sleeping in a luxury hotel suite or a sprawling Atlanta estate tonight. He will be sleeping on a thin mattress in a federal holding cell. The assets he fought so desperately to keep are entirely worthless to him now. This is the consequence of treating people as stepping stones. Terrence, I say, delivering the final, devastating truth. You spent 6 years trying to diminish my light so your shadow could look larger. You thought my combat boots and my deployments made me less valuable. You wanted a woman who brought value to the table, but you were entirely too blind to recognize that I owned the table, the chairs, and the building we were sitting in. Chloe stands completely frozen near the center of the polished dance floor. The reality of the federal indictment crashes down on her perfectly styled hair and custom designer gown. As a luxury realtor, she understands the absolute severity of federal tax evasion and asset forfeiture. She realizes that being legally married to Terrence means she is tethered to a man with an unfunded adjustable rate mortgage, zero equity, a repossessed vehicle, and a mountain of federal restitution. She looks down at her left hand. The massive diamond engagement ring is no longer a symbol of elite status or impending wealth. It is a highly documented piece of stolen property. It is the physical manifestation of felony wire fraud. Chloe lets out a sharp, guttural sound of pure panic. She reaches across her body and grips the ring with frantic, trembling fingers. She rips the jewelry off her hand, the metal scraping aggressively against her skin. She stares at the diamond for a fraction of a second before winding her arm back and hurling it directly at Terrence. The ring strikes the center of his chest and bounces off, falling to the polished hardwood floor with a sharp crack. It skitters away into the shadows of the banquet hall. "I am getting an annulment!" Chloe screams, her voice cracking with sheer hysteria. "I am calling my lawyers right now. I am not going to prison for you, Terrence. I had no idea the money was stolen. I am not taking on your federal debt." She does not wait for a response. She does not look at the affluent guests watching her complete breakdown. Chloe grabs the heavy embellished skirts of her white reception dress, hoists them up, and sprints toward the side exit. She bursts through the patio doors and disappears into the warm Georgia night, completely abandoning the fraudulent life she had so eagerly tried to steal. With Chloe gone, the absolute isolation of Terrence becomes undeniable. I shift my gaze to David and Sarah. The aggressive, entitled posture Sarah carried into my military housing unit has completely evaporated. The haughty, condescending white suburban wife who demanded a $15,000 check is gone. She looks at her husband, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization of how badly they miscalculated their target. She realizes her husband's business was utilized to fund a federal crime, and her brother-in-law is a convicted felon in the making. She realizes she insulted a millionaire defense contractor, and her own lifestyle was saved only by my calculated precision. David steps forward, his face hardened into a mask of pure disgust. He looks at Terrence, the brother he had protected and subsidized for years. "You stole from my company," David says, his voice low and vibrating with a lethal anger. "You sat at my dining table and told me your wife was draining your savings. You took the operating capital we set aside for our own employees so you could play a rich man in Las Vegas. You let Sarah march into a military housing unit to extort a woman recovering from a traumatic brain injury." Terrence tries to speak to offer some pathetic justification, but David cuts him off instantly. "You are dead to me," David states, the finality in his tone echoing across the silent room. "Do not call me from jail. I will not pay your legal fees. You are not my brother anymore. You are a liability." David places a firm hand on Sarah's arm and physically turns her away. They do not look back. They walk toward the main entrance, leaving Terrence entirely surrounded by the wreckage of his own design. The federal marshals do not allow the drama to delay their operation. The lead marshal grasps Terrence by the bicep and begins to march him toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the venue. Terrence drags his feet, his head hanging low. His custom-tailored ivory tuxedo looks absurdly out of place alongside the dark tactical gear of his captors. He is a man who traded a secure, wealthy marriage for a fraudulent illusion, and now the illusion has violently shattered. The crowd of Atlanta elites parts for them, phones held high, recording the spectacular downfall of a man who thought he could deceive an entire city. As the marshals pull him past where I am standing, Terrence suddenly digs his heels into the hardwood floor. He stops and turns to face me. He looks at me with desperate, tear-filled eyes. The arrogance, the condescension, the smug satisfaction he carried into my hospital room are completely gone. He is reduced to the pathetic whimpering of a man who knows he is entirely out of options. "Jada, please!" Terrence begs, his voice breaking into a loud, humiliating sob. "Please, we were married for 6 years. We are family. I made a massive mistake. I was stressed. I was not thinking clearly." The marshals pull on his arms, but he leans toward me, desperate for a lifeline. "You have the money, Jada," he pleads, the tears streaming down his face, ruining his pristine image. You have the influence. You can call your corporate lawyers. You can bail me out. Please do not let them take me to federal prison. Please save me." I look at him. I look at the man who left me in a trauma ward with fractured ribs. I look at the man who proudly flaunted his infidelity and threatened to destroy my military career to pay for his honeymoon suite. I feel absolutely no pity. I feel no anger. I feel the profound, undisturbed peace of a perfectly executed tactical operation. I look him dead in the eyes, making sure my final words are etched permanently into his memory. "I am just an army officer, Terrence," I reply, my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of mercy. The word building hangs in the stagnant, heavy air of the grand ballroom. Chloe stands completely frozen near the center of the polished dance floor, the reality of the federal indictment crashing down upon her perfectly styled hair and her custom designer gown. As a luxury realtor in the highly competitive Buckhead market, she understands the absolute severity of federal tax evasion, asset forfeiture, and wire fraud better than anyone else in the room. I watch her mind actively running the catastrophic mathematics of her situation. She realizes that being legally married to Terrence means she is tethered to a man with an unfunded adjustable rate mortgage, zero equity, a repossessed corporate vehicle, and a mountain of federal restitution that the government will extract from his future earnings forever. She looks down at her left hand. The massive diamond engagement ring is no longer a symbol of elite status or impending wealth. It is a highly documented piece of stolen property. It is the physical manifestation of a felony. Chloe lets out a sharp, guttural sound of pure panic that slices through the quiet venue. She reaches across her body and grips the ring with frantic, trembling fingers. She rips the jewelry off her hand with such force that the metal scrapes aggressively against her skin, leaving an angry red mark on her knuckle. She stares at the diamond for a fraction of a second, before winding her arm back and hurling it directly at Terrence with all the strength she can muster. The ring strikes the center of his chest, bouncing off his ivory tuxedo jacket, and falls to the polished hardwood floor with a sharp crack. It skitters away into the shadows of the banquet hall, rolling under a table draped in white linen. "I am getting an annulment!" Chloe screams, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated hysteria. "I am calling my lawyers right now. I am not going to prison for you, Terrence. I had no idea the money was stolen. I am not taking on your federal debt." She does not wait for a response. She does not look at the affluent guests who are watching her complete and total breakdown. Chloe grabs the heavy embellished skirts of her white reception dress, hoists them up to her knees, and sprints towards the side exit. She bursts through the heavy glass patio doors, her heels clicking frantically against the stone terrace, and disappears into the warm Georgia night. She completely abandons the fraudulent life she had so eagerly tried to steal, leaving her new husband standing in the center of the room in handcuffs. With Chloe gone, the absolute suffocating isolation of Terrence becomes undeniable. I shift my commanding gaze to David and Sarah. The aggressive, entitled posture Sarah carried into my temporary military housing unit has completely evaporated. The haughty, condescending white suburban wife who marched into my home and demanded a $15,000 check is gone. She looks at her husband, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization of how badly they miscalculated their target. She realizes her husband's business was utilized to fund a federal crime, and her brother-in-law is a convicted felon in the making. She looks around the room, acutely aware of the wealthy investors and corporate executives listening to every word, judging her association with a thief. She realizes she insulted a millionaire defense contractor, and her own lifestyle was saved only by my calculated precision and restraint. David steps forward, his face hardened into a mask of pure disgust. The betrayal he feels is radiating from his entire body. He looks at Terrence, the younger brother he had protected, subsidized, and defended for years. David understands that the Internal Revenue Service audit will undoubtedly bleed into his own business records. He understands the profound damage Terrence has inflicted upon their family name. "You stole from my company," David says, his voice low and vibrating with a lethal, barely contained anger. "You sat at my dining table and looked me in the eye. You told me your wife was draining your savings. You told me Jada was a financial burden. You took the operating capital we set aside for our own employees so you could play a rich man in Las Vegas. You let Sarah march into a military housing unit to extort a woman recovering from a traumatic brain injury." Terrence tries to speak. He opens his mouth to offer some pathetic justification to spin another lie to deflect the blame as he has done his entire life, but David cuts him off instantly. "You are dead to me." David states the absolute finality in his tone, echoing across the silent room. "Do not call me from the county jail. Do not call me from federal prison. I will not pay a single cent of your legal fees. You are not my brother anymore. You are a massive toxic liability." David places a firm hand on Sarah's arm and physically turns her away from the scene. They do not look back. They walk purposefully toward the main entrance, their heads held high in a desperate attempt to salvage whatever dignity they have left. They walk out the doors, leaving Terrence entirely surrounded by the wreckage of his own design. He has no wife, no family, no assets, and no freedom. The federal marshals do not allow the domestic drama to delay their operation any further. The lead marshal grasps Terrence firmly by the bicep and begins to march him toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the venue. Terrence drags his feet, his head hanging low, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. His custom-tailored ivory tuxedo looks absurdly out of place alongside the dark utilitarian tactical gear of his captors. The sweat is visibly beading on his forehead, ruining his perfectly lined-up fade. He is a man who traded a secure, wealthy marriage for a fraudulent illusion, and now the illusion has violently shattered, leaving him exposed to the harsh reality of the justice system. The crowd of Atlanta elites parts for them. The guests hold their mobile phones high, recording the spectacular, unmitigated downfall of a man who thought he could deceive an entire city. The flash of phone cameras illuminates his humiliation. As the marshals pull him past where I am standing, Terrence suddenly digs his expensive leather shoes into the hardwood floor. He stops his momentum and turns his body to face me. The marshals yank on his arms, but he resists just long enough to lock eyes with me. He looks at me with desperate, bloodshot, tear-filled eyes. The arrogance, the condescension, the smug satisfaction he carried into my hospital room are completely gone. The man who told me I would never recover financially is reduced to the pathetic whimpering of a cornered suspect who knows he is entirely out of options. His ego has been completely obliterated. "Jada, please," Terrence begs, his voice breaking into a loud, humiliating sob that carries across the silent banquet hall. "Please. We were married for 6 years. We are family. I made a massive mistake. I was stressed. I was not thinking clearly. I did not mean to hurt you." The marshals pull harder on his arms, dragging him another step toward the exit, but he leans his upper body toward me, desperate for a lifeline that he himself severed. "You have the money. Jada," he pleads, the tears streaming down his face, ruining his pristine, carefully curated image. "You have the influence. You have the government connections. You can call your corporate lawyers. You can fix this. You can bail me out. Please do not let them take me to federal prison. Please save me." I look at him. I survey the weeping, broken man standing in handcuffs before me. I look at the man who left me in a trauma ward with fractured ribs and a concussion. I look at the man who proudly flaunted his infidelity, who stole from his own brother, who sent his racist sister-in-law to harass me, and who threatened to destroy my military career to pay for his honeymoon suite. I search myself for any lingering trace of affection, any shred of sympathy for the life we once shared. I find absolutely nothing. I feel absolutely no pity. I feel no anger. I feel the profound, undisturbed peace of a perfectly executed tactical operation. He is no longer my husband. He is a neutralized, hostile threat. I look him dead in the eyes, my posture immaculate, ensuring my final words are etched permanently into his memory before the heavy doors of the federal penitentiary close behind him. "I am just an Army officer, Terrence," I reply, my voice perfectly level, commanding and entirely devoid of mercy. "You will never recover financially from this. The most profound lesson here is that your true worth is never determined by those who fail to see it. Sometimes the family we are born into cannot provide the love we deserve due to their own limitations. Being abandoned or excluded is not a reflection of your value, but rather a powerful catalyst for discovering your own resilience and independence. True family is ultimately defined by mutual respect and the consistent choice to show up for one another. If you have ever had to set difficult boundaries to protect your peace, Share your story in the comments below and subscribe for more inspiring journeys of healing.